If I asked you what really drives property prices, what would you say? Most people would probably jump straight to interest rates, and yes, they matter, but there are 4 other numbers that can move the market just as much. Numbers that almost no one talks about, yet they show where house prices are heading months and even years before the headlines catch up. So in this episode of the Property Academy podcast, you're going to learn the 5 numbers that impact house prices the most, how to use the data to see where the market could be going, and where to get this for free. And today we are counting down the top 5 factors that impact house prices here in New Zealand, from the least influential to the biggest mover of them all. And we're going to show you where to find the data for free and also how to interpret it. Now, Andrew, what is number 5, or the number 5 factor when it comes to data that drives house prices?
Well, this is a pretty important one. It's whether or not you can actually get the money. So if you think about the fact that most people don't walk into an open home with $800,000 in their savings account, right? They're going to have to get a mortgage to buy a property. So if that's the case, if a bank is more willing to lend you money, then obviously that's going to stimulate the market more than if they're less willing to lend you money. And a great way to kind of get this data to either understand that, yep, the market might be heating up or slowing down, is actually looking at Tony Alexander's Mortgage Advisors report. So he sends a survey out to a bunch of mortgage advisors, and then they all answer based on what they're seeing all of the time.
And he asked them a very simple question. Are banks or lenders becoming more willing to what he calls advanced funds or not? And if we look at the most recent data, we can see that there was this big pullback after the peak of the market back in 2021, where almost a net 100% of mortgage advisors were saying, actually, it's really hard to get a mortgage back then. That was, when the triple CFA was being brought in, that was the rule, where if you spent too much at Kmart or you bought a few too many coffees, or you couldn't get a mortgage anymore. But if
who was the one guy that said, "Nah, it's easy"?
I don't know. It would have been some smart ass from Gore who's like, no, mate. Is that how they roll their R's in Gore?
I don't know, but if you're a mortgage broker in Gore listening to this, you are the only one, and send your complaint to Ed.
Well, but with also an explanation.
Also, how dare you make fun of someone's New Zealand accent?
Do you know what? I was having a lunch that I'd won with Simon Bridges, former National Party leader, and I said to him, Simon, did you get really upset when the media was really mean about your accent? He didn't shed a tear, but I could tell inside.
You could tell.
Your comments about our accents hurt us deep and emotionally. And I'm talking to both the media and the YouTube commenters.
Leave your comment on YouTube as well.
When we get to, it's harder. But since about mid-2023, more mortgage advisors have been saying, actually, the banks are more willing to lend. Now, the reason we've put this at number 5 is this is not an accurate predictor of where house prices are going to go next month or even next year, because more mortgage brokers have been saying, actually, banks are pretty willing to lend for the last couple of years, and meanwhile, house prices have basically gone nowhere. But this is about the conditions that allow for house prices to either increase or decrease, right? If all of the banks are pulling back and not lending out any money, there's a pretty good shot that house prices are going to go down, or at least be stable for a long time. Whereas if the banks are more willing to lend, that's a pretty good sign that there is capacity for house prices to potentially go up. What's number 4?
Number 4 is the dwelling consent. So this is when a builder or a developer has some land and they apply to the council to approve the building of a new property or new units or something else there, right? And this is probably not going to have an immediate impact, but it gives you a really good indication of what the future stock level might be. And why is that important? Well, if there are a whole lot of consents being applied for, that probably indicates that there will be some more builds coming up in the next 12, 24 months. And then as a result, fast forward 24 months from now, that could indicate that there's more stock going to be on the market. More stock means more supply. More supply means that prices, might stay stable or go down, compared to less stock where there might be a bit more demand than there is stock available and pushes prices up.
And it's probably more of a long-term indicator as
Absolutely.
opposed to a short-term indicator. And the reason I say that is because this is about increasing the stock of overall houses in New Zealand, as we're going to see a little later on with, I think it's either factor number 3 or factor number 2. The supply of listings on the market is what really drives short-term price increases. But if we are looking at dwelling consents, you can get these for free. If you Google like Stats NZ dwelling consents, it'll be the first thing that comes up. And what's really fascinating to see is that we did see a massive building boom from 2011, 2010, right throughout until 2021. And the reason for that is, first of all, after the 2004 house price boom in New Zealand, we saw lots of building. Then it pulled back during the GFC. No developers could get any lending, so they pulled right the way back. Then we saw this big rush forward. We're now back around where we were in 2019, 2018, in terms of the number of properties being consented at the moment. So I kind of look at the number of dwellings that are being consented at the moment as neither pushing house prices up or necessarily pulling them back. We're kind of more at a normal level.
One thing I would say is sometimes people assume that all properties that are consented are actually going to be built, and that's not the case. So there are instances like in Auckland at the moment where there might be consents being applied for and granted where I know that developers are saying, there's conditions on this consent that I can't actually meet, particularly around the water care situation. So you might look at Auckland and say, that's a relatively normal number, but you do sometimes want to dig into some more information around that.
The other thing that can also impact it is, let's say that I'm now a rich person and I'm getting bigger in my chair now.
I don't know why you have to do this because you're rich.
I'm imagining that I'm a big...
You've been eating more.
How do rich people sit in chairs? I don't know. And I'm a rich person and I see a house. So I'm like, I'm going to rip that down. I'm going to build a new one. Well, I've got to apply for a building consent. But that is not necessarily an extra house added to the New Zealand housing stock because I've ripped one down, I've put one back. Similarly, if you were building, let's call it 4 townhouses, but you had to rip down 2 standalone houses in order to build them, well, that's 4 dwelling consents, but only an additional 2 houses added to the New Zealand housing market. Now, supply really impacts the capacity for how much house prices can go up. So there was a Reserve Bank study that basically showed if interest rates fall and house prices are going up, house prices will go up more in the areas where it's really hard to build. Whereas if there is an area where it's pretty easy to build and the councils are pretty lax with handing out these building consents, well, that means that as house prices are rising, the supply engine can start kicking into gear, and developers will say, great, house prices are going up, let's build some more houses. That stock comes online, and so that limits further house price increases. But if it's really difficult to build lots of houses, well then in those areas, house prices shoot up even more. But what's the third metric that drives house prices?
Net migration. So are there more people coming into the country than leaving, or leaving the country rather than coming? And the reason that's important is we're a relatively small country, right? And if you think about, the impact that, remember there was that spike just after COVID where a net 100,000, maybe it was more than that.
I'll tell you the exact number.
Tell me the exact number.
We got up to about 130,000, I think it was.
130,000 people coming into the country more than were leaving in a particular 12-month period. Like, that has quite a material impact because those people all need somewhere to live. Now, they might not all go buy a property, but again, if there's more properties being used by renters that are coming into the country, well, those existing renters that were living in that house might go out and buy a property. So it puts overall pressure on the housing market as a result.
Especially because in our small country, that is quite a large percentage increase in our population. So that 135,000 people that came into New Zealand, or net migration adding 135,000 people to our population, that's like over a 2% increase in the population in New Zealand in a single year. And meanwhile, we're also having lots of babies as well. And so that has an impact. And in fact, I saw, according to one, pretty old, it was from 2013, but I saw a Reserve Bank paper coming out that showed that a 1% increase of the population from net migration could increase house prices, inflation-adjusted house prices, by 8% over the
8%.
next 3 years. And so that's probably why a couple of years ago, Westpac was coming out predicting like 11% increase in house prices. It hasn't eventuated, but that's the reason why they were coming out really strongly, saying we think house prices are going to go up because we had all of these people coming into New Zealand.
The other interesting thing about trying to calculate that, and I'm sure there are a bunch of very clever nerds that are able to model this out, but you think, how do you actually arrive at that conclusion, given that anytime where you've had net migration at a particular level, there's also so many other factors. So how do you control that as being the only factor?
Well, I'll have to print off the paper so you can have a little read of it later on. But
I'll get in onto that.
There are a couple of ways that you do it. One way, and I'm not sure if this is what they did, you might use what's called a hedonic model. Now, basically what that means is you create a formula. What's that?
No, I'm just kidding.
Are you falling asleep?
Snoring. Yeah.
No, this is actually quite interesting.
No, I'm sure it is.
No, so what they do sometimes is you might create a formula for what you think house prices are going to be, and then you attribute different
Okay, I get
different
what you mean.
factors to each variable.
And you put a weighting on each of them.
That's basically it. And so then you say, okay, 1% increase in population from net migration equals roughly a 8% increase in real house prices over a given time frame. That's a little bit nerdy, but that's how you do it. You'd know that if you went to university.
If you enjoyed that, leave a comment in the comment section of YouTube.
By the way, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with not going to university.
No. Also, if you didn't go to university like me, also put that in the comments in YouTube.
No, it's just that there's very little things that I can give you shtick about, and that's probably the only one I've got over your head.
It's the low-hanging fruit.
Now, when it comes to, who are you calling a fruit? Now, when it comes to, you didn't like that joke?
No, not that good.
Oh, you can cut that one out then.
No, leave it in.
I want people to think that I'm funnier than I am. Now, if we're thinking about net migration right now, it's pretty low in historic context. You know, we're sitting at about 15,000 people a year. I mean, what's interesting is that we hear a lot about the number of Kiwis moving overseas. What you're probably forgetting about is the number of people who are still moving here. So net migration is still positive, even though it is well below average. So we'd probably say this is more on the orange light side at the moment, rather than like net migration going gangbusters, meaning that house prices are going to spike in 2 minutes' time or something like that. Because while we have a lot of people coming in, we also still have a lot of people leaving. Now, what is the second factor that we think drives house prices?
That is how much stock is actually available for people to buy. So, obviously, really basic economics is about supply and demand, right? If you think about the fact that, okay, if there's more properties available, then that probably keeps the prices down compared to if there's less properties available and there's more demand. But it can kind of be a bit of a hard number to kind of gauge whether or not
just on that, if I can jump in, when people talk about housing supply, they often think about the number of houses that we have in New Zealand. But what drives spot prices, market prices, is, well, how many people are selling their houses today? I mean, it's a little bit like if you were thinking about, I'm going to use a random example, like the price of spa pools.
Yeah.
The price of spa pools isn't driven by the number of spa pools that are in New Zealand. There'd be a lot
that already exist in people's backyards.
There'd be a lot of spa pools in New Zealand. The price of spa pools is driven by, well, how many people are selling them today? How many are currently in retail shops? Now, let's say that for whatever reason, a lot of stores sold out of their spa pools. Well, even though there are lots of them in New Zealand, that would still drive the price up, because the number that are available for sale is what really drives prices, at least in the short term. And so that's why we want to look at the number of properties that are currently listed for sale. But even if we just look at the raw number of listings that are currently on the market, and that number is quite high, that can give you a bit of a misleading view.
Yeah, and this is the big thing. You want to know how quickly that stock or inventory is actually being absorbed by the market as well, by people looking for properties. And the way to do that is overlaying the number of properties available versus how fast a property is selling. And that tells you, that can give you a number for how long would it take the existing inventory available for sale to sell out. So if nothing more was listed today, would we have 6 weeks, 10 weeks, a year? How long would it take for that the available properties for sale to sell out?
And the best place to get this, I reckon, is on interest.co.nz. They release realestate.co.nz's numbers. Realestate.co.nz are probably the people who release this most frequently. Right now, we're sitting at about 22 weeks of inventory or stock on the market. And what's interesting is while property listings have ramped up over the last couple of years, we've also had this recovery in terms of sales. And so we are seeing both the supply of listings on the market increase, but we're also seeing demand. That's netting out to being pretty flat over the last couple of years, actually. We've got the same number of weeks of stock on the market today as we had probably about 3 years ago, I'd say now, and roughly about the same as what we had in 2015. So while there has been a ramp up in listings, and you can certainly look at the year-on-year increases and be like, oh, that's quite a large increase, what matters is those are also selling. The other thing I like about the interest.co.nz data is you can also jump into your individual region. So for instance, right now, yes, there are 22 weeks of stock on the national market, but if we were looking at a place like Canterbury, it's going a lot better. There's only 14 weeks of stock. So you'd say, okay, well, the Canterbury market's probably doing better than the national market. If you look at the price movements, you know that's absolutely true as well. If I overlaid the Auckland data on there, you would expect Auckland to be doing quite substantially worse. And yes, we see that 29 weeks worth of stock on the market compared to 22 for the national level. We'll link that down in the description as well, so that you guys can play around with all of the data that we're talking about today. And Andrew, the last and most important factor that drives house prices, what is it?
Not the cost of a house, but the cost of actually having the debt, the interest rates. Because again, if we figure that most people are going to take out a mortgage, whether or not it's easy or hard to get, well, let's assume you do get a mortgage, you still have to be able to afford to pay it back. Now, if interest rates are coming down, and the way I'd gauge this is not by looking at the OCR, because sure, that often has an impact on actual interest rates that we pay. You really want to look at what people are actually paying today and how that's changing. So say you take the 1-year rate, which is a good benchmark, or the 2-year interest rate, whatever you choose, and look at how that is tracking. Because if the 1-year interest rate, if it's getting cheaper for people to borrow money, then they can tend to spend more on a property or take out a bigger mortgage because, well, it doesn't impact their cash flow. They can afford to spend more money without it costing them more on a weekly basis, and that will often have the biggest impact on prices going up.
And the place I like to get this data is actually on my own website,
Of
It's just that the way that I've created the graph works for me. So I'll link this down in the show notes, but you could actually choose, which interest rate you want to look at and get a week by week breakdown of how that has been changing in terms of the interest rates that the main banks are advertising, and whether you want to see it on a 1-year, 10-year, whatever basis. Now, at the moment, interest rates have been coming down like very aggressively. It wasn't that long ago, back at the end of 2023, start of 2024, that the average 1-year interest rate was over 7%, like 7.3, 7.4% some banks were charging. Now, only 18 months later, ANZ just the day before we recorded this podcast cut their 1-year rate to 4.79%. And so we have seen some quite substantial cuts of over 2.5% down from the peak.
When you think about that as a percentage of reduction, it's a third off, right? That's significant.
Well, the last time we had this level of aggression in terms of the size of the cuts probably was back in the GFC. It wasn't as aggressive as that. We had much, much steeper cuts back then because the world was going to hell in a handbasket. But the level and the size and the speed of these cuts probably outweigh what we saw during the COVID period, because we were already at a very low level.
Yes.
We got some sharp cuts. We got some quite large cuts, but they were smaller than what we've got today. And the reason I wanted to talk about these 5 factors is, you could look at 50 charts of different pieces of data trying to figure out what it all means, but I think these are the 5 ones that really matter. So if you want to play around with them yourself, we'll link all 5 of these down in the show notes, down in the description, so you can have fun nerding out on data with us. So now you know the 5 numbers that drive property prices and how to track them yourself. But what do these numbers actually say about the year ahead? Are we looking at more of a flat market? Will house prices go up? Or could they even go down even further? Well, that's exactly what we break down in the next video using the latest data to show you what's coming next.